Welcome back to All About Winning Daily Fantasy Sports. My name is Ty Patton. It's time, my favorite time of the week, when we finally put all the research together to build winning lineups. I'm glad you're here, and I truly hope you get some value from my research. If you see the Cowboy Fan 215 in any of the contests that you're in, that's me. If you do have some success, please drop some comments on Monday when I post my video where I do the recap and the Monday Night Football Showdown. I'd like to hear if anyone's doing any good with the research that I've provided. And if you use some of these lineups that I'm going to show you here that I've generated through an optimizer and one that I did manually that I really like, if you would use those um, in the contest that I'm in, you'll just be splitting because I do use this player pool that I'm going to share with you. Okay, let's get going. These are the players that I researched this week, and I'm going to be using them in my player pool. I've added a couple, and I have a couple question marks beside a few, and I'll tell you why. First, the quarterbacks. I made no changes to the quarterbacks that I researched. These are the ones that I like. I'm going to stick with them. I don't mass multi-entry, meaning I don't do 150 lineups. I build a few contests or a few lineups, and I play in a few or some different contests. But these are the quarterbacks that I'll be using. Atlanta's Matt Ryan, Houston, Deshaun Watson, Dallas, Prescott, Cincinnati's Dalton, Baltimore's Lamar Jackson, Tampa Bay's Winston, Philadelphia's Carson Wentz, and New Orleans' Teddy Bridgewater. The running backs that I like, Johnson from Arizona, Elliott from Dallas, McCaffrey from Carolina, Jacksonville's Fournette, Minnesota's Cook, Baltimore's Ingram, and Pittsburgh's Connor. These are the wide receivers that I like. Michael Thomas from New Orleans, New England's Edelman. I want to mention too, make sure you check the injury report at 11:30. NFL teams have to disclose their injury report an hour and a half before game time. Make sure you check. Edelman has a questionable tag beside him, said he was limited all week. And New England is notorious for being real sneaky with their injury reports. So make sure you check that if you're using some of these players that have questionable tags. And check it anyhow, because you never know. A player might pull something in warm-ups and you had no idea he was going to be sitting out. And one thing, any of these contests, whether it's head-to-head, 50-50, GPP, you don't want a zero. Cincinnati's Tyler Boyd, Atlanta's Julio Jones, Tampa Bay's Evans, Philadelphia's Jeffries, Minnesota's Thielen. I added Cobb from Dallas. This is a revenge game for him against Green Bay. Baltimore's Hollywood Henderson. I added him last week. I mentioned in my recap that I noticed that some of my quarterbacks that I had, I didn't necessarily have one of their targets in my wide receivers, and I like that to be a rule, especially in like GPP or tournaments with more players. Now in cash, the smaller entry contests, you don't necessarily have to have a target with your wide receiver. Matter of fact, because if your quarterback goes down or something, that could just kill your whole lineup in cash. But I mean, it could do it too in GPP. But a lot of the winning lineups in GPP are game stacks or team stacks. Last week, for instance, was a four player team or game stack. 3 players from the Rams: Goff, Woods, and Cup. And he brought it back with Godwin from Tampa Bay. I also added Keyshawn Johnson from Arizona, Alden Tate from Cincinnati. John Ross is out, and Tate will be filling in. And I don't know who's going to guard him for Arizona. I think it's a phenomenal matchup. It's also evident in some of the sites where I've been checking out ownership. He's got really high ownership too. He's only $3,500, and a lot of people are going to him for good reason. And I also added Houston's Fuller to go along with DeAndre Hopkins in case you can't spend up to get to Hopkins and you want to pivot off of him. I added Fuller. Tight ends I'm going to be targeting are Hooper from Atlanta, Oakland's Waller, Carolina's Olsen, Philadelphia's Ertz, New Orleans' Cook, Cincinnati's Eifert, Baltimore's Andrews, and I added Green Bay's Jimmy Graham. Um, Dallas has given up a lot of points to the tight end position. The last game against Philadelphia, towards the end of the game, Rodgers was locked into Graham, and Devontae Adams is out tomorrow. So you could some of those targets got to go somewhere, and I could see Graham having a decent game against Dallas. And I'm unbiased. This is a Dallas Cowboy jersey. I'm a Dallas Cowboy fan, but when I build lineups, I try to build the best lineups possible with my head, not my heart. Defensive special teams, Philadelphia, New England, the Chargers, Bears, and Tennessee. The Bears game is interesting, by the way. It's actually in London, England, and it's 10 o'clock Pacific. I guess it'd be 1 o'clock Eastern, but um, just so you know that game is way, it's not on the East Coast, it's over the ocean. So, excuse me. Not sure how that'll affect Oakland traveling all that far. I mean, the Bears traveled a good distance too, but it's really a long distance for Oakland. Now, what I do before I build any of my manual lineups, I take all the players that I've researched through the week and decided that I'm going to target, and I put them in an optimizer. And as I mentioned, I don't do mass multi-entry. Don't have anything against anybody that does. I just don't have the finances to do that. So I try to build the best possible lineups possible, and I don't punt any position. I research them all, and I put a lot of research and effort into it. So I set the optimizer that I use. I set my exposures to 20%. Some players I'll raise to 30% that I might like more than others. For instance, David Johnson for Arizona this week. I really like him. Cincinnati's worst defense in the league against the run, so I like him a lot. I also like him as a pivot off of McCaffrey. I'm not as high on McCaffrey this week as everyone else is. So I take these players, I put them in Optimizer, and run 150 lineups, exposures at 20%. That way I don't get the same player in 80 of my lineups. 20% is 10%, 20% is 30 lineups max out of 150 that they'll show up. And then I put a couple restrictions on, for like GPP purposes, I'll put quarterback has to have at least a wide receiver or a tight end matched up with him from the same team. And I go through and I get that all set up and I run the optimizer. And I'm going to share with you the very first lineup that the optimizer spit out. Now, another thing I wanted to mention, I have my defenses that I'm going to be targeting. Philadelphia, New England, Chargers, Bears, and Tennessee. I don't put any restrictions on the defenses with the optimizer. I just let it to see what it spits out. And defenses have so much variance anyway. But this is the very first lineup that it spit out that I'm going to share with you. It was Teddy Bridgewater at quarterback. Remember, all these are from my player pool. Running back was Cook. Second running back was Johnson. Wide receiver was Alden Tate, the one I was talking about from Cincinnati. He has his ownership's really up there. Then the other wide receiver that I added, Keyshawn Johnson. He popped up in this lineup. Then it came back and gave us Michael Thomas to stack with Teddy Bridgewater. Where is Thomas? There he is. You will never see Michael Thomas at $6,600 if Drew Brees was playing. He's going to have some high ownership because of that. and it could be value off of some value off of Hopkins and Julio Jones this week. Tight end was Hooper. Hooper started off the season really strong. The flex position was McCaffrey, and the defensive special team was the Steelers. Now, me personally, when I seen this, I that was the optimizer. The optimizer spit that lineup out. Very first one, it was the highest points. If you want to use it, that's fine. I'll be using it in a contest. Just hope we're not in the same one, or we'll be splitting. Um, First thing I did with that is just a quick look is I took out McCaffrey and plugged in the one that I like, Elliott. And again, I just think Elliott has a better matchup. Uh, Green Bay's number 30 against the rush. I think that uh, Prescott will have a difficult time getting the ball to Cooper. I'm not sure how healthy Gallup is. He's probable for tomorrow. So they might be throwing a lot of underneath stuff to Cobb. But when I plugged Elliott in, that raised my salary left to 2,500, and I still couldn't get up to one of the defenses that I had. So if I just left it at the Steelers, there you go. But if I just use my player pool, I probably would have took out Hooper, and I like Jared Cook. There's Andrew. Let's see, there's Hooper. I like Jimmy Graham, and that would allow me to plug in one of my defenses that I have. That's totally from my player pool right there. $50,000, used every bit of the salary. I'm going to show you one more that I found interesting. And this isn't from the optimizer. This is from my this is my manual build. I'm sorry. So let's go back here to quarterback. I really like Matt Ryan a lot this week. He's averaging 20.5 points per game. Um, his game is the highest total on the slate. I like him a lot. Running back, Ezekiel Elliott. I feel like he's a nice pivot off of McCaffrey, and the matchup is better. And McCaffrey, remember, did have a difficult game against Tampa Bay, so he's capable of. I mean, he scores a lot of points and gets a lot of targets and touches, but he has been, and I'll show you real quickly in case people forget. If you go to this game log, right there in week number 2, 7.3 points at home against Tampa Bay. So it can be done. It's not like he's matchup proof. I'm going to put David Johnson in there. Julio Jones, team stack with team stack with Matt Ryan. I really like that combination this week. I'm going to bring it back with Fuller from Houston. I believe it's 4,500. And Auden Tate. This is a phenomenal. Auden Tate is a phenomenal matchup. If you look at the actual and Boyd is going to be getting a lot of attention you could see that this could. And also, don't forget that Arizona is just absolutely horrible against the tight end position. They're giving up over 23 points per game to the tight end, dead last in the NFL. Tight end, Jimmy Graham from the Packers. He's 4,300. Flex position, Mark Andrews from Baltimore. He gets a lot of targets. He gets the red zone targets. And I think they're going to bounce back this week against Pittsburgh. Defensive special teams, one of my favorite of the week is the Titans. So there you go. 49.5, $500. Every player is from the player pool. Uh, this is from my research this week. You can move things around with that. You can add another target for Ryan. You could take Elliott out, and you could actually get up to McCaffrey if you wanted. If you wanted to take Elliott out, it would look like this. Right there. That's a pretty strong lineup right there, I feel. You'll probably see this one if you're in the same contest I am. Like I said, I'm a little bit higher on some other players than McCaffrey. I'm not saying you don't play him at all. I just feel like there might be some value in other places. And I really like that lineup. Now remember, last week, and it doesn't mean that's what's going to happen this week, the top lineup had 4 players from the second highest total game on the slate. 4 players from that game. 3 of them were from the losing team, Goff, Woods, and Cup, with Godwin bringing it back. This lineup here is similar with Ryan and Jones bringing it back with Fuller. It's only 3 player, but it's similar. It's a pretty strong lineup. Remember, when you're building these lineups, think about game script. Doesn't make sense. Check the injuries at 11:30. And again, this is my research and my opinion. I assure you, this is what I'm going to be using for the players, for the contests that I enter. Some combination of these players. And that's the trick, getting the right combination. Remember, wide receivers have a lot of variance. Tight ends are really hard to predict. Don't get so much caught up in trying to figure out who's going to score the touchdowns and treat that more as a bonus, because touchdowns have a lot of variance. And again, this is your lineup, your money. Feel free to use the ones that I showed you. The one was the very first lineup that the optimizer spit out. But I like to use that just to it gives me some randomization, and I put my players into it, and it scrambles them up, and maybe I didn't look at that particular setup of players in a certain way. Check your ownership. If in cash games and games that have less entries, you don't have to necessarily match up, as I mentioned, quarterback with wide receiver. You don't have to automatically stack in, as I mentioned. But matter of fact, if your quarterback goes down, probably, and you got 2 other targets with it, you can probably forget that lineup for that contest in the lower cash games, or not lower amounts of money, but the actual amount of entries that are in it. And stacking is really common in the larger GPPs. Getting the right stack, being different, that'll get you somewhere in GPPs. And there's only 2 4:00 games tomorrow, and feel free to drop me any questions that you might have. I'll check all the way up until game time off and on. I'll give you my opinion if you want to ask me a question. Check the weather. I'm looking. If you look at the top of the um, Draftkings, it'll give you a generic weather. It doesn't look like anything that's standing out. And check. Make sure you check the injuries. I'll be back Monday to do a recap and give recognition to those of you who have won with me by using my information. But I'll also break down the Monday night football showdown slate when I do the recap as well. Hopefully, this will be of some value. Show you how I use the players that I've developed through the week and just kind of summarize it all for you. Thank you for joining me. My name's Ty Patton. This is all about winning daily fantasy sports. Good luck tomorrow. I'll see you on Monday. Take care.